Millionaire abandons his pregnant wife, but years later, at an awards ceremony, he regrets it deeply. New York City, a city that never sleeps, pulsed with an energy that could ignite the dreams of the ambitious and crush the fragile hearts of the naive. The skyline stretched high, illuminated by the promise of success, casting shadows over the streets where the real stories unfolded, stories of dreams made and broken, all in the span of a heartbeat. James Parker stood at the top of a building that reflected his rise, sleek, modern, cold. It was a symbol of his success, one that came at a price he was willing to pay. At 32, he had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, power, influence, and the promise of an even greater legacy. His mind, sharp and calculating, never rested. He surrounded himself with people who fueled his ambition, people like Liam Collins, his business partner, whose loyalty had proven invaluable in his pursuit of more. Liam, unlike James, wore his emotions openly. He admired James for his unwavering commitment to success, even if it meant making difficult choices. "You're building something that will last forever, James," he often said, offering encouragement with a gleam of admiration in his eyes. But James was beyond flattery. His eyes were always fixed on the future, on what could be, rather than what was. Sophia Mitchell, on the other hand, was not a part of this world, or at least she hadn't been. When they met, she was studying at a small college in Manhattan, far removed from the world of billion-dollar deals and high-rise offices. Her warmth was her charm, the kind that made her forgettable to many, but unforgettable to James. She had met him at a charity event, a place where the elite mingled to showcase their virtue. But James had seen something in her that he hadn't expected: genuine kindness. For a moment, his cold, calculating exterior had cracked, revealing something deeper. Sophia had fallen in love with James almost immediately, captivated by his ambition, the way he could command a room with just a look. But she hadn't realized how cold he truly was. His love was conditional, contingent upon her acceptance of his vision, his empire. He often spoke of his plans for the future, of how he intended to leave a legacy that would make his name, but he never spoke of her in those plans, not in the way she had imagined. Their relationship had been intense, fast, and passionate. But it was also fleeting, as though James was always a few steps ahead, never truly present. When she discovered she was pregnant, the world shifted beneath her feet. She had never imagined herself as a mother, but there was something about carrying his child that filled her with hope for a future together. She believed in the possibility of change, believed that James would come around, that he might one day choose her over his obsession with success. But that hope was dashed the night James left. He had told her it wasn't the right time, that the demands of his career left no room for a family. His words were cold, his decision absolute. He left her standing in the middle of their apartment, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing like the finality of a tomb. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Sophia had never felt so alone, her heart breaking as she grappled with the reality that the man she loved didn't want the life they could have built together. Sophia didn't tell anyone at first. She kept the news of her pregnancy to herself, not wanting to burden her friends or family. But Emily Lane, her best friend, had noticed the change. Emily had always been the more grounded one, the artist who saw the world through a lens of creativity, and she knew something was wrong the moment she saw Sophia's eyes, those eyes that once shone with hope and love, now clouded with loss. "Are you okay?" Emily had asked one night, sitting beside her on the couch, a soft smile on her face as she painted the canvas before her. "You're not yourself, Sophie. Something's going on." Sophia's voice trembled as she confided in her. "He left me, Emily. James, he's gone. And now I'm pregnant." The words felt like a weight she couldn't lift, but Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she embraced her friend, offering comfort in silence, the kind that spoke louder than any words ever could. As the months passed, Sophia's world became smaller. She focused on herself, on the child she carried, and on finding a way to rebuild. Emily supported her through the darkest days, helping her navigate the challenges of being a single mother. Despite her own artistic career taking off, Emily never hesitated to put Sophia first, constantly lifting her spirits and urging her to keep going, to keep fighting for a future. Meanwhile, James's empire grew. He expanded his businesses across continents, leaving no stone unturned in his quest for dominance. His relationship with Liam grew even more solid, the bond between them unbreakable as they watched their hard work come to fruition. But something inside James began to shift. There were nights when the thought of Sophia would linger in his mind, an image of her standing at the edge of his consciousness, always just out of reach. But he dismissed it, buried it beneath the weight of his ambitions. It wasn't until months later, when a reporter named Ralph Carter reached out to Sophia, that the story truly began to unfold. Ralph had been following her quietly from the sidelines, sensing that there was more to her than the typical rags to riches narrative. He was drawn to her strength, to the way she had risen from the ashes of her heartbreak and built a life that was entirely her own. Sophia's story was one of resilience, but it was also one of unfinished business. James had abandoned her, yes, but she had learned to stand tall in the absence of his support, and yet, as her story continued to unfold, so did James's, his ambition taking him places he hadn't imagined, and a moment of fate bringing their paths back together in the most unexpected of ways. This was the beginning. The stage had been set. But neither James nor Sophia could have anticipated the twists that lay ahead, and soon the world would see how their true connection had always been there, waiting for the right time to emerge. It was a night like any other, yet it was the night that marked the end of everything Sophia had believed in. The soft hum of the city outside their apartment, the light from the skyline casting a pale glow through the windows, had always been a comforting presence. But tonight, that light seemed to mock her, casting long, cold shadows across the space that once felt like home. James was standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that could only be described as detached. His eyes were focused on something beyond the city, a future that only he could see. While Sophia stood across the room, her heart pounding, the silence between them growing more oppressive with each passing moment. "Sophia, we need to talk." His voice was firm, no trace of the warmth she once knew in it. She had felt something shift in him recently, a distance she couldn't bridge. It was as if the man she had fallen in love with had disappeared, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. She looked at him, a lump forming in her throat. "What's going on, James? You've been distant for weeks now. I don't understand." She tried to keep her voice steady, but the fear creeping into her words betrayed her. James turned around, his face set in a way that made her stomach twist. He looked like a man who had already made up his mind. "I'm not ready for this. I don't think I ever was," he said, his gaze unwavering, cold. "This pregnancy, it's a complication, Sophia. It's going to be a distraction. I can't afford distractions. Not now. Not when everything is on the line." The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "A distraction," she whispered, disbelief making her voice tremble. "You're talking about our child as if it's some kind of inconvenience?" James looked away, his jaw tightening. "I've worked too hard to get here, Sophia. I've built something that could change everything for us. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. There's no room for a family in that equation." She wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he was, to remind him that they had made promises to each other, that love had been their foundation. But there was something in his eyes, a hardness that told her there was no reaching him now. The man she had known, the man who had once whispered sweet promises in her ear, was gone, replaced by this stranger who couldn't see beyond his own ambition. "You're leaving me," she said quietly, the realization settling like a weight in her chest. It wasn't a question, it was the truth. James hesitated for just a second, his eyes flickering with something unreadable, before he nodded. I think it's the best decision for both of us. You'll be fine, Sophia. You're strong. You'll find a way." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the middle of the room, her world shattering around her. The sound of the door closing echoed through the apartment, the finality of it ringing louder than any words he had spoken. Sophia stood frozen, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't allow herself to cry. Not yet. Not when she still couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened. The love of her life, the man she had believed in so completely, had just walked away. And worse, he had chosen his career over the family they had created together. The days that followed were a blur. Sophia spent hours staring at the walls, at the empty spaces in their apartment that once felt alive with the promise of a shared future. She couldn't bring herself to pack his things or erase his presence from their home. The pain was too raw, too consuming. But life didn't wait for heartbreak. It kept moving forward as it always did. When the reality of her pregnancy set in, so did the flood of gossip and judgment from the outside world. The whispers in her social circle, the pity in people's eyes, everyone seemed to have an opinion on her life, as if she were just another casualty in the city's fast-paced, cutthroat race for success. They didn't know the full story. They didn't know that James had chosen his empire over her, over their child. But Sophia refused to let their words define her. She turned inward, retreating into herself. Her once blossoming career as an artist had taken a back seat during her relationship with James, but now it became her lifeline. She poured herself into her work, focusing on each brushstroke, each color, as if they could wash away the bitterness and confusion that clung to her like a second skin. In time, her art evolved, her style maturing into something deep and introspective. The pain she had been through became the fuel for her creativity, and she found solace in the quiet solitude of her studio. Emily, her best friend, had been there every step of the way, offering unwavering support. She had been the one to hold Sophia when the tears finally came, the one who made sure she never lost sight of who she was beyond the pain. "You don't need him, Soph," Emily would say, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. "You're stronger than this. You're not defined by him, and you sure as hell aren't defined by what he's done to you." It was through Emily's encouragement that Sophia slowly began to rebuild herself. She started to exhibit her work at local galleries, eventually gaining recognition for her talent. As her reputation grew, so did her confidence. She was no longer the broken woman who had been abandoned by the man she thought she'd spent her life with. She was Sophia Mitchell, the artist, the woman who had survived. Meanwhile, James's world continued to spin in a direction that left no room for regret. His rise to power was meteoric, his name becoming synonymous with success in the business world. Deals were struck, partnerships were formed. He accumulated wealth at an exponential rate, pushing himself harder and harder to stay ahead. Yet there was always an emptiness inside him, a hollow space where the warmth of human connection should have been. He had become so consumed by his empire that he had lost sight of the things that once mattered. He hadn't heard from Sophia in months, but occasionally the thought of her would surface in the back of his mind like a fleeting ghost he couldn't quite banish. He told himself it was for the best. After all, his future was too important, too monumental to be hindered by the past. But deep down, he knew the truth that the legacy he was building would be a hollow one without her. Still, he pushed forward, never looking back, always chasing the next goal, the next victory. And as his empire grew, so did the distance between him and the one person who had ever truly mattered. The night was like something out of a dream, a world of glittering lights, elegant gowns, and sharp tuxedos. The atmosphere was charged with a quiet, yet palpable energy, as the city's elite gathered to celebrate accomplishments and accolades. In the heart of New York City's most exclusive venue, the Grand Ballroom gleamed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung like clusters of stars above the polished marble floors, casting a soft glow over the sea of distinguished faces. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the hum of quiet conversations. James Parker stood at the center of the room, his posture erect and confident. Now, in his late 30s, his outward appearance reflected his success-sharp suit, meticulously combed hair, the glint of gold cufflinks catching the light. His once youthful features had hardened over the years, his jaw a little more square, his eyes a little more distant. The lines around his eyes spoke of long nights spent behind closed doors, negotiating deals, and the weight of responsibilities that had come with his billions. But beneath the polished exterior there was a subtle weariness, a hollowness that hadn't existed in the man he had once been. He had come a long way since the days he had abandoned Sophia, but the thought of her still lingered, despite the layers of success and wealth he had accumulated. It was a feeling he had pushed aside for years, choosing instead to focus on the business that had become his obsession. Yet tonight, something in the air was different, something that made the past creep into his consciousness like an unwelcome shadow. The award he was set to receive was a testament to his rise Entrepreneur of the Year, but the recognition didn't feel as satisfying as it once had. His eyes wandered across the room, scanning the crowd of influencers, executives and entrepreneurs. Then they froze. There, across the room, standing near a group of philanthropists and socialites, was Sophia Mitchell. It took a moment for him to process. She had changed, of course. She had. The soft, uncertain woman he had once known was gone. In her place was someone entirely different. She stood with an air of grace and quiet strength, her posture confident, her head held high. A black flowing dress clung to her frame, the fabric accentuating her silhouette. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, swept over the room, and for a fleeting moment their gazes locked. The instant their eyes met, the space between them seemed to vanish. The noise of the room faded into the background. Time itself seemed to stretch, and James felt his heart skip, as if the years between them had evaporated, leaving only the raw emotions of that long-ago night. The guilt, the regret, everything rushed back in a single heartbeat. Sophia didn't flinch. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned her attention back to the conversation she had been part of. It was as if she had dismissed him completely. To anyone watching she appeared poised and composed, but James could see the flicker in her eyes, the recognition that, despite everything, she still carried the weight of what he had done. Sophia had transformed in ways he hadn't imagined. Her face, once marked by the innocence of youth, now radiated the quiet confidence of a woman who had lived through hardship and emerged stronger. There was no longer any trace of the woman who had been devastated by his abandonment. She was an entirely new person. Her success in the art world was now a well-established fact, her name respected, admired even. But it was her charity work that had truly made her a force to be reckoned with. She had become a symbol of strength, especially for single mothers and abandoned children, the very group she had once been a part of, though she had risen far beyond that world. The applause of the room, however, reminded James that he wasn't alone in his thoughts. He had been invited here for a reason to be honored for his achievements, but the face from his past had brought everything crashing back. Without thinking, he began to move toward her, his feet carrying him in the direction of the one person who had never fully left his thoughts, even when he had tried to bury them. He had never imagined that this moment would come, that they would be in the same room, on the same night, in front of so many people. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many apologies that hung in the air between them. But what could he say? How could he ever explain what he had done? Sophia, however, was well aware of his approach. She didn't need to look up to know he was coming toward her. She could feel the tension in the room, the shift in the air as his presence loomed behind her. She could almost hear the familiar rhythm of his footsteps, the way he always walked with such purpose, such determination. When he was just a few steps away, she finally turned to face him, her expression calm, but her eyes betraying the emotions she had worked so hard to keep at bay. She was still the woman he had known, but she was also someone entirely new. The weight of the past was there, but it no longer had the power to break her. "James," she said, her voice smooth, polite, but there was a hardness to it now, a guardedness that he hadn't expected. She had changed, and it was evident in the way she stood steady, unwavering. "Sophia," he replied, his voice thick with something unspoken, perhaps regret, perhaps longing. For a moment they both stood there, facing each other, the years between them hanging in the air like a forgotten secret. He could see the walls she had built, but he also saw the woman who had survived, who had thrived without him. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. She wasn't angry. She wasn't broken. She was whole in a way he had never been. "How are you?" he asked, his words simple, but they carried a weight that belied their simplicity. Sophia's gaze softened, but only for a moment. She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm well. I've done what I set out to do." Her words hit him harder than anything else she could have said. "I've done what I set out to do." It was as if she were telling him that she had no need for him anymore, that her life had moved forward and he had no place in it. The moment stretched, and though the tension was thick, there was no turning back. They had both changed in different ways. The distance between them was no longer just physical, it was emotional, rooted in everything they had lived through. James took a step closer, but Sophia subtly shifted back, her polite demeanor maintaining a careful distance. "I'm glad to see you're doing well, James," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed the faintest glimmer of emotion, pain, perhaps, or the ghost of something they had once shared. And just like that, the years that had separated them didn't feel like years at all. They were two people standing in the same room, strangers in some ways, but bound by a past neither could escape. The emotions that flooded through James, guilt, regret, longing, threatened to overwhelm him. But Sophia was stronger now, and as she looked at him, she held a quiet power he could no longer claim. The weight of the night's encounter settled on James like a physical burden, a heaviness he couldn't shake. His usual self-assuredness had been shattered, the carefully constructed walls he had built around his emotions beginning to crack. He sat in his hotel suite, alone, staring out at the glittering skyline that had once symbolized all his aspirations, but now felt distant and cold. The glass of whiskey in his hand remained untouched, the amber liquid swaying gently with the subtle tremors of his hand. His mind replayed the brief exchange with Sophia, the way she had looked at him, polite, composed, but indifferent. Her eyes had held no trace of the softness he remembered. There was no longing in her gaze, no hint of the woman who had once clung to the hope of a future together. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, and the memories flooded back. The night he left her, the night he chose everything he had worked for over her, over their unborn child. He had told himself it was the right decision, that he had to focus on his career, that success was the only thing that could guarantee his legacy. But now, in the stillness of his room, the truth was harder to ignore. His mind had been clouded by ambition, by the relentless pursuit of power and wealth. In that moment, he had convinced himself that abandoning Sophia was necessary, that his vision of success couldn't afford the distraction of a family. But what had he truly gained? The accolades, the wealth, the empire, it was all hollow, a monument to his own ambition. But it lacked the warmth of human connection, the love and support that Sophia had once given him so freely. He had walked away from her, from them, and in doing so, he had condemned himself to a life of solitude, one where no matter how much money he made, no matter how many deals he closed, something crucial was always missing. It wasn't just the loss of her that gnawed at him, it was the loss of the man he could have been. The man who had been capable of love, of softness, of compassion. Somewhere along the way, he had traded that in for the cold, calculating businessman he had become. And now, with everything he had ever wanted at his fingertips, he realized it wasn't enough. He hadn't been able to see it back then, but now the emptiness was unbearable. Sophia sat in a quiet cafe the following morning, a cup of coffee in front of her, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug absently. She had arrived early, seeking solace in the ordinary, the mundane, after the emotionally charged encounter the night before. Her mind felt heavy, as though the past had come rushing back to claim her. She hadn't expected the reunion to affect her the way it had. She had told herself she was ready for it. After all, she had built a life without James, one that was independent, strong, and free of the shadows he had cast. But seeing him again, the man who had once promised her the world and then abandoned her when it became too much of a burden, had stirred something deep inside her. There was no anger in her anymore, no bitterness. But there was a sense of finality, a feeling that everything that needed to be said had already been said. She had given him the chance for redemption, but it was clear to her now that the man standing before her was not the same person she had once known. His power, his wealth, they were just distractions, empty markers of success. She wasn't angry at him. What good would anger do? No, she had moved past that. She had to, for her own sake. And yet a part of her had always wondered what would happen if they crossed paths again, if the years apart would bring any kind of resolution. But there would be no resolution, not with James, not now. Sophia's thoughts drifted back to the night she had found out she was pregnant with their child. The shock, the fear, the overwhelming sense of being alone in the world. But the moment she had seen that tiny heartbeat on the ultrasound, a fierce protective instinct had risen in her. She had promised herself, no matter what, she would raise that child alone if she had to. She would give him the life he deserved, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had once dreamed of. She had poured herself into her art, yes, but it had been more than that. She had thrown herself into creating a stable world for her son, focusing on building a life for him, a life that would never have to face the same abandonment she had known. Her son, now 7, was her pride and joy. She had raised him alone, no help from James, no guidance. But she had done it. And in doing so, she had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw it was James's name. "Can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt the familiar pang of something she hadn't expected to feel: vulnerability. But she pushed it down, focusing on the clarity she had gained over the years. She knew what she had to do. She didn't owe him anything. And yet, she couldn't help herself. She wanted to know if he had truly changed. She wanted to hear him admit finally that he regretted what he had done. They agreed to meet later that afternoon. James arrived at the cafe, his hands tense at his sides, his heart pounding in his chest. He had rehearsed everything he wanted to say, but now, in front of Sophia, he felt the words slipping away. She looked even more beautiful than he remembered, but it wasn't just her appearance that struck him. It was the way she held herself, the strength radiating from her. He sat across from her, the table a silent barrier between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "You've changed," she said, her voice quiet but steady. James nodded, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm not the same person I was when I left you, Sophia. I regret it every day." Sophia's gaze remained unwavering. "You should." He flinched, the sharpness of her words cutting deeper than he expected, but she wasn't done. "I know you regret leaving me," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "but that's not the reason I agreed to meet you today." James furrowed his brow. "Then why? What do you want from me?" Sophia paused, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I need to tell you something I should have told you long ago." Her eyes met his, a flicker of something unreadable in them. "The child you abandoned, he's not yours." The words hit him like a slap to the face. He leaned back, stunned, the room spinning around him as the truth sunk in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sophia's eyes were steady. "When I found out I was pregnant, there was a moment of weakness. I made a mistake. The father of my son. It wasn't you. It was someone else. But I chose to raise him as your son, James. I never told you the truth." The air between them seemed to freeze, the weight of her confession hanging in the space like an unspoken truth. James felt a wave of emotions crash over him. confusion, guilt, a strange sense of relief, and something deeper, more visceral. His son. Her son. The child he had never known. For a moment neither of them spoke. The past, with all its pain, regrets, and untold truths, stretched out before them, finally laid bare. The coffee had long since gone cold between them. James sat in silence, his eyes unfocused as he absorbed the enormity of what Sophia had just revealed. His mind raced, a whirlwind of disbelief and confusion, but beneath that, a strange, simmering realization began to settle. The truth she had laid out was undeniable, yet it was something he hadn't expected to hear. His son wasn't his. The child he had abandoned, the child who had unknowingly borne the weight of his neglect, was not his biological son. A surge of guilt coursed through him, a powerful wave of shame that he had never known could exist in him. How could he have walked away from a life he had never truly known? How could he have chosen wealth, status, and success over the one thing that could have given him real meaning, family? He sat back in his chair, his hands clenched tightly in his lap, and closed his eyes for a moment. The years of self-deception, the lies he had told himself, everything had come crashing down. What had he really lost? What had his ambition really cost him? Sophia, calm and composed, watched him, waiting for him to speak. She wasn't angry, she wasn't expecting an apology. She had made peace with everything long ago. But James, the man who had once been so certain of his path, was now staring at the fragments of a life he had never allowed himself to have. "It doesn't change what I lost, Sophia," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "It doesn't change the fact that I wasn't there when I should have been." Sophia nodded slowly, understanding. "I'm not asking you to fix the past. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, James. I've moved on. What's left now is simply the truth." For a long moment, the only sound between them was the faint hum of the city outside. James felt the weight of her words settle into him, deep into the core of his being. The truth. That was the one thing he had never truly faced, his own truth, his own choices. "I didn't know," he said finally, the words feeling foreign as they left his mouth. "I didn't know what it meant to truly regret something. Not until now. All these years, I thought I was chasing something, but I wasn't chasing anything that mattered. I was running away from everything that did." Sophia didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at him, her face unreadable. In her eyes, James could see the scars of the past, scars that had healed, that had shaped her into the woman she had become. She wasn't the same person who had stood by him, hoping he would come around. She had built a life for herself, independent, strong, and whole. She had learned to love herself, to love her son, to love the life she had built. It had taken years of pain, years of solitude, but it had also given her strength. Strength that James could now see, but could never fully understand. "I've built a life without you, James," she said softly. "A life I'm proud of. I don't need you to validate it. I don't need you to validate me." James swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I know," he whispered. "I know I can never undo what I've done, but I don't want to live with the regret of not trying to make it right. I don't know if there's a future for us, but I want to at least try to be part of your life, your son's life, if you'll let me." Sophia's expression softened, but only slightly. "You're welcome to try," she said, her voice steady, "but it won't be easy. And it's not just about what you lost. It's about what you still have to learn, what you still need to change. Your life, your choices, they're hollow. You've sacrificed everything for wealth, James. But in the process, you've lost the very thing that could have made you whole." James looked at her, and for the first time in years, he saw the truth in her eyes, the truth about himself. He wasn't just a businessman, a millionaire, a success story. He was a man who had run from the most important thing in life, who had chosen ambition over love, who had sacrificed his own heart for a fleeting sense of power. "I don't know if I can change," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I want to try. I want to try for you. For him. For my son. Sophia didn't say anything more. She simply nodded, a quiet acceptance in her gaze. She didn't expect miracles. She didn't expect him to change overnight, but she could see that something had shifted in him. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance if he was willing to do the work, to face the truth, and to rebuild what had been broken. Later that day, James sat in his office, staring out at the city below, lost in thought. The past few hours had been a whirlwind of emotions, but the weight of what had happened didn't seem to lessen. He couldn't stop thinking about Sophia, about her strength, her transformation. She had done it all without him. She had built a life he had never thought possible. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his office door opening. Liam stepped in, his usual calm demeanor betraying a hint of concern in his eyes. "James," Liam said, his voice measured. "I thought I'd find you here." James didn't respond immediately, his mind still swirling with the events of the day. Finally, he turned toward Liam, his expression weary. "I don't know what to do anymore." Liam sighed, stepping further into the room. "I've known you for a long time, James. I've watched you chase success. But I've also seen the price you've paid, the people you've lost, the relationships you've sacrificed, and it's been eating at you for years. You've been running from something, haven't you?" James looked at Liam, the weight of his friend's words sinking in. "I don't know if I've ever really known what I was running toward. I thought success would fill the hole, but all it's done is make it bigger." Liam's gaze softened. "You've built an empire, James, but what good is it if you don't have anything real to hold on to? People like you, people who are so driven, they lose sight of what really matters. And that's where you're at now. You've lost everything for a dream that was never real." James's throat tightened as Liam's words hit their mark. He had always trusted Liam, respected him. But hearing this now, hearing someone else finally name the emptiness he had been feeling, was like a cold slap in the face. "You're right," James whispered, "but I don't know how to fix it." Liam gave him a pointed look. "Maybe it's not about fixing it, James. Maybe it's about starting over. You've spent so long chasing what you thought you wanted, but now you need to figure out what's worth chasing. And maybe it's time to stop running." James nodded, his heart heavy with the realization. The reckoning had only just begun, and this time he wasn't running from it. The air between James and Sophia had shifted over the past few weeks. What had once felt like a chasm of unspoken resentment was now filled with quiet understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that they had both endured their own separate battles and neither could change the other's past. They had spoken often since their initial reunion, sometimes about the pain of their separation, sometimes about their present lives. But now, as they sat across from each other in a small, quiet room, the atmosphere felt different. This was the moment that had been building for years. James, usually so composed, sat uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes tracing the worn lines of the coffee table between them. The silence hung heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if both of them were waiting for something, waiting for the right words, the right moment to come to terms with all that had been left unsaid. Sophia leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped together, her gaze steady but kind. "James," she began, her voice low but resolute, "you've been asking for forgiveness for the past, for what you did. But forgiveness isn't just about what you've done. It's about what you failed to do." James looked up, meeting her gaze, and the weight of her words sank in slowly. It wasn't just about his abandonment of her, about the coldness with which he had turned his back on everything they could have had. It was about the man he had become, the one who had forgotten what it meant to be human, to be present, to be part of something real. "I've never really thought about it that way," he said quietly. "I've been so focused on the past, on my mistakes, that I forgot to see what I've been missing in the present." Sophia's expression softened, but there was no trace of pity in her eyes. She wasn't here to save him or fix him. She had done the hard work of saving herself, of building a life that no longer revolved around him or the man he had once been. You've spent so many years building this empire, James, she continued, her voice steady. But what you've really been building is a prison of your own making. And I can't be a part of that. I won't be part of someone else's version of success if it means losing myself in the process. James swallowed hard, the truth of her words cutting deeper than anything he had ever experienced. He had spent so much time chasing power, status and wealth, thinking that they were the keys to everything, thinking they would fill the void inside him. But the void had never been about money or success. It had always been about connection, about love, about the very things he had cast aside in his pursuit of more. I want to reconnect with him, James said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to be part of his life, your son's life. I know it won't be easy, and I know I can't undo what's been done. But I have to try, for him. Sophia's eyes softened with a quiet understanding. I know you want to be part of his life, James, but it's not just about wanting. It's about showing up consistently, being present in ways that you've never been before, and that's something you'll have to prove, not just to me, but to him. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle between them. James felt his chest tighten, but he didn't look away. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. He knew that rebuilding a relationship with his son, after all these years of silence and absence, would take more than just words. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, real hope, not the kind of fleeting ambition he had once chased, but the kind that came from truly desiring to change. Sophia continued, her voice soft but unwavering. I've forgiven you, James, not for what you did, but for what you failed to do, and I've let go of the past because I have to. I've built a life that I'm proud of, but I need you to understand that I've moved forward. I'm not asking you to be the man you were before. I'm asking you to be someone new, to focus on your own growth. James nodded slowly, the weight of her forgiveness settling on his heart like a balm. He knew that this was the only way forward. He had to rebuild himself from the ground up, but not for her, for himself. The night of the awards ceremony arrived, and the room buzzed with anticipation. The prestigious gala was filled with the who's who of New York's elite entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and industry leaders, all gathered to celebrate the year's most influential figures. James sat at his table, his eyes scanning the room, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had barely noticed the lavish surroundings or the conversations that swirled around him. All his attention was focused on one person, Sophia. Tonight was her night. She was being honored for her work with single mothers and abandoned children, an award for her charity efforts, for the life she had built, for the person she had become. As the ceremony went on, James couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe as he watched her approach the stage. She stood tall and confident, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, her presence commanding attention. She was radiant, not just in her beauty, but in the way she carried herself, graceful, assured, at peace. She had become everything he had never allowed himself to be. The applause that followed her speech was deafening, but James could only focus on her words. Sophia's voice, steady and clear, filled the room. Resilience is something we learn not through success, but through failure. Love isn't defined by the mistakes we make, but by our ability to grow from them. And family is about who chooses to be there, not who you're born to. Her words struck James like a thunderclap, echoing in his chest with an intensity he had never known. The woman who had once needed him, who had once hoped for him, was now speaking to a room full of people, sharing a truth that he had only just begun to understand. She wasn't angry with him anymore. She wasn't seeking anything from him. She was simply living her truth, standing tall in a life she had built with love, with care, and with fierce determination. As the applause rang out, James watched her with a mixture of admiration and regret. She had become the version of herself that he could never be, the one who had found peace in herself, in her choices. And for the first time, James realized that he couldn't change the past. No amount of wealth or power could ever take away the years he had wasted. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could begin again. The ceremony continued, but James wasn't really listening anymore. He was already thinking about the future he could still build, the one that could be filled with honesty, with authenticity. It was a long road ahead, but he was ready to walk it. Sophia had found her peace. Now it was time for him to find his. The quiet hum of the city outside his office window seemed distant to James now, almost irrelevant. The glossy skyline that had once represented everything he strived for now seemed to hold little appeal. His gaze rested on the papers before him, but his mind was far away, lost in the memories of the past weeks, the conversations with Sophia, the quiet epiphanies, the painful realizations about himself and the life he had lived. He had spent years chasing something that had never truly mattered, and now, for the first time in a long while, he was beginning to question everything. It was early morning, the light from the rising sun casting a warm glow over the city. James hadn't felt this level of clarity in a long time. The pursuit of wealth, of power, those things no longer seemed like the markers of success. His definition of success had changed. He had always measured success by the numbers, by the size of the deals, by the luxury of the lifestyle. But now, standing at the crossroads of his own transformation, he realized that true success was measured not in figures, but in connections. In the bonds he forged with others, in the way he treated the people who mattered most, not just in business, but in life. He thought about his son, the boy who had grown up without him, whose name he had only allowed without guilt. Reconnecting with him would take time to prove himself, time to build trust, time to show that he wasn't the same man who had walked away so many years ago, and he knew that. He wasn't expecting immediate forgiveness or understanding, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid to try. He wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, to take the steps necessary to rebuild what had been broken. James had no illusions about the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, painful moments, and uncomfortable truths along the way. But he was no longer willing to turn his back on the life he could still have. He would take it one step at a time, learning, listening, and most importantly, being present. That was the foundation of any meaningful relationship, wasn't it? As he sat there, reflecting on the change that was slowly taking root within him, a knock on his door pulled him out of his thoughts. It was Liam, his business partner, the one man who had always been there, the one who had watched him from the sidelines as he chased after success and wealth. Liam's eyes were steady, but there was a certain softness in them now that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking about you, James," Liam said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet sincerity. "You're on a new path, aren't you?" James nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, I think I am." Liam studied him for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "It's not going to be easy. You know that, right? You can't just flip a switch and expect everything to fall into place, but if anyone can change, it's you." James met Liam's gaze, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. "I'm done chasing something that isn't real, Liam. I'm done running. It's time for me to face the truth, not just in business, but in my life." Liam gave him a long look, then finally nodded, as if coming to a quiet understanding. "I'm here for you. You know that, right? No matter what." Meanwhile, across the city, Sophia was continuing her journey in her own way. She had embraced the changes in her life with a quiet grace, her heart full of purpose. Her art had gained the recognition it deserved, and her charity work had expanded beyond her wildest expectations. But more than that, she had found something more valuable than any accolade or recognition. She had found peace within herself. Sophia no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. She had long ago stopped seeking validation from others. Her art had become her voice, her passion, and through it, she had built a community of like-minded individuals who shared her vision for a better world, one where love and connection were at the forefront. Her relationship with Emily had deepened, and together they continued to support one another through the highs and lows of life. Sophia had even begun to accept the occasional quiet invitation to share her story about her resilience, her journey as a mother, and the lessons she had learned along the way. But it was never about the spotlight. It was about sharing a truth that had shaped her. She never allowed herself to be consumed by the mistakes of the past. She had long ago made peace with them, and now she could look at her life with gratitude, not regret. She had built a life she was proud of, not in spite of her struggles, but because of them. Each moment, each challenge, had brought her closer to the woman she had become. The road ahead for both of them would be long, but it was no longer defined by the past. James had learned the hard way that wealth and success meant little in the absence of meaningful relationships. Sophia had learned that true empowerment came not from seeking external approval, but from embracing her own worth and authenticity. Together, they had both found the courage to change, to grow, and to move forward. As the story of their lives unfolded, it became clear that the greatest success they could achieve wasn't found in power or status, but in the connections they made along the way. It was in the people they chose to love, the bonds they chose to nurture, and the growth they nurtured within themselves. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, James and Sophia looked ahead not with fear, but with hope. They knew the future was uncertain, but it was theirs to create. And whatever path they chose, they would walk it with open hearts, knowing that resilience wasn't about being perfect. It was about learning from the past, making amends where needed, and moving forward with the courage to be true to who they were. It was in that truth that they found the strength to face whatever came next. And in the end, that was the most meaningful success of all. When all is over, the old wounds are still there, but they are also valuable lessons that help people realize the true value of love, family, and being honest with themselves. James, despite losing valuable opportunities, found an awakening in life that happiness does not lie in power or money, but in sincere connections and forgiveness. As for Sophia, she not only started over, but also became a model of the strength of resilience, never giving up in the face of challenges. If this story makes you feel emotional, subscribe to continue following the inspirational journeys and profound messages about life, love, and maturity.